Hello, my friends and enemies. Glad you are here. If you enjoy this video, or the channel as a whole, please consider subscribing, hitting the notification bell, liking the video if you think we did a good job, and most importantly, sharing this video everywhere. We would greatly appreciate it. Your support means everything to us. Thanks to everyone who already supports us. Little disclaimer, I have had my doubts about the show, but this is me trying to give an unbiased, objective review of the Rings of Power. If they do something good, then I will praise them. If they do something bad, I will call them out. But I will try to look at the show from a perspective of entertainment, lore, realism, and cinematic quality. So please bear with me. This could be a long one. Oh, and it's going to be pretty spoiler heavy, so if you want to watch the show without knowing anything, you might want to skip this one. The intro is literally sand moving to sound vibration in different shapes, to Howard Shore composed music. I feel so bad for Howard Shore since it doesn't have the same umph that the Lord of the Rings had and makes you feel goosebumps. I was hoping for at least a good soundtrack. After Meteor Man lands and Galadriel decides to become the greatest swimmer of all time, as if this wasn't already the most ridiculous concept right into a show, we get a shot of Galadriel still in the water looking up at the stars, presumably to get her bearings to know which direction to go. But I noticed that she isn't holding Finrod's dagger in her hand, and it doesn't look like it's anywhere on her person. And she just starts swimming on the far side of the ocean. You cannot make this stuff up. Well, I guess you can, since they did. It never happened. Pretty much all of episode 1 never happened. The stuff that didn't happen the way they say it happened. Hey, if Amazon gave me $1 billion for making up stuff that didn't happen and making a show out of it, I'd be very rich, while the show in the story wouldn't be. Right, showrunners? Back at the Meteor Man crash site, Nori is just standing over the crater and looking down onto this underwear man just laying there. Then her friend Poppy Proudfoot sneaks up and startles her, urging her to get away from there when she gets a view of what is happening. They get catfighty with each other, and Nori ends up falling and tumbling down a 7-foot drop that isn't even steep. We then find out that the ground that is red like magma and fire is not hot. Magic. Nori then pokes Meteor Man in the face, but it gets even better. Poppy calls out to Nori that the quote unquote giant is dead and to come back to safety. Suddenly, the Meteor Man grabs her arm, and we get this gem of an image. All of a sudden, he yells, but we can't quite make out what he's saying. But it kicks up a firestorm and it swirls around with rocks floating in the air, and they are trying so hard to make it appear like an Astari with magic being used. Suddenly, it's over, and the nearby fire pours into the Meteor Man, and he flops over, and fire bursts out again, like it was before. I can't figure out what I'm supposed to get from this as a viewer. Is it just supposed to wow me or something? We move on to see Sadak Burrows, the patriarch, and Nori's mom and another Hearthfoot talking about the Starfall and what to do with the camp. Leave or stay. Sadak tells them to not act rashly and to keep a lookout and then shoos them away. Then, as he investigates further, things start getting snatched by Nori and Poppy nearby, but they are always a step ahead of him. Poppy and Nori are carrying Meteor Man in a wheelbarrow with lanterns. They're talking about what race he might be. Not a human, not an elf. They stop to chat, and of course, anyone with a brain can see that a wheelbarrow on a hill with no one holding it and a large object that weighs a bit will know that a ride down the hill uncontrollably is inevitable. Guess what happens? They They hide him in a little alcove, and as they talk, Nori feels like it's something important and she needs to take care of him. Plot writing. At Bronwyn's neighboring town, Arondir and her look through the rubble, and they still burning fires are there, just seemingly going to go on forever without actually taking everything up and, like a torch. But there are deep fissures all over. Instead of it being obvious, the writers have to use Bronwyn to explain it to the viewer. Because we didn't already notice. Amazon really thinks we are stupid and need everything spelled out for us, while simultaneously showing us that don't have meaning and purpose to characters or plot. Like, somehow are we supposed to understand this? Like, I'm not really sure what they're trying to go with. But there are no wounded or dead people in the town, but there are dead animals. Something looks to have burrowed underneath the town. Please don't let it be the giant worms from The Hobbit. So Arondir tells Bronwyn to warn her people and then jumps into the hole. Because why not? Now we get 2 shots of Eregion, home of the Elven Smiths. Not a bad looking city per se, just looks a tad bit small. The city doesn't look horrible, but we get more domed roofs. That just doesn't strike me as elven. The CGI is all right, except for the weird shadowing around it, where you could tell it was put into the mountain. I wish they did it more like Peter Jackson and make mini models for realism. Now we see Feanor's hammer. Feanor was an excellent craftsman, but a terrible person. Nothing really good to say about him. We get our first mention of the Silmarils. Too bad it means nothing to anyone who isn't familiar with the Silmarillion. Oh, don't worry. Elrond will explain that they are jewels of the light of Valinor in them. Even though he is talking to Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor knows exactly what the Silmarils are. So it's obviously for the viewer, but done horribly. Celebrimbor tells Elrond that he wants to create beauty beyond mere gems to replace the war they brought to these lands. So he wants to build a tower that will have the greatest forge ever in it. Problem is he wants it done by spring. Why? Don't know. Why can't immortal beings wait long enough for it to be built naturally? Don't know. So Gil-galad cannot give him the workforce he would need to have it done by then, the largest ever assembled. So the High King gives Celebrimbor Elrond. Because Elrond has the means that the High King does not. Right. So Elrond asks if Celebrimbor has ever considered a third party. Guess where we are going? Bet you didn't see that one coming. Khazad-dûm, home of some dwarves. One of the many realms of dwarves. They only list it as realm of the dwarves, but there's multiples. We learn that Elrond and Prince Durin are friends. Celebrimbor seems to admire the dwarves' ability to craft with stone. Elrond tells of the great welcome that Prince Durin will give them. Then we get a hole in the door and a voice that says, "What do you want?" Elrond says they wish an audience with Prince Durin. No, and the hole closes. Apparently, Prince Durin has already rendered judgment about not seeing them. Strange. They literally just got there and were told no mere seconds after arriving. There wasn't even enough time to send word to Prince Durin that there was anyone at the door. More on that later. So Elrond invokes the right of seeking Sagar. I guess we'll find out what that is soon, won't we? But the door opens instantly. No hesitation. Like they were waiting for it. The dwarves actually look pretty good. though the beards look a little fake with how rounded the ends are. Someone named Megan Lilly plays a wildling guard. Interesting. The dwarves escort Elrond inside. We get this cool shot of the inside of Khazad-dûm. Or Khazad-dûm. Then we get the first shot of Prince Durin. Seeking Tagar apparently is a test of endurance that Aule, the Valar who created the dwarves, made for them. Basically, break stones until the other can't anymore. If Elrond does not win or forfeits, then he is banished from all dwarven lands. If he wins, then he gets a single boon granted by the dwarves. You can tell by the dwarves' demeanor that something is up. Hopefully we'll find out later. Nori travels to visit Meteor Man, and it seems she brought him something. But he isn't where she left him. He seems to be behind the area drawing on a rock with a rock. There are whispers coming from what he is drawing. Nori says hello, and he spins and shouts, and magic winds blast her and bends the trees. Oh, and Sauron whispers are all around. Because Meteor Man is a bad guy? Or that's what they want us to think. Meteor Man, also known as the Stranger, starts imitating Nori, but when asked his own name, he just pauses and zones out, like he doesn't know what it is. Because he doesn't know. When asked about where he is from, or if there are others of his kind, he grabs a stick and draws in the dirt. But Nori can't understand, and quite frankly, neither can I. I can understand my toddler son's gibbering better than this. Poppy shows up to tell Nori that her dad is injured. He apparently broke his ankle while setting up a building that a rope broke, and down it goes. Nori feels responsible. Why? Don't know. Her being there would not have stopped her dad's foot from slipping and breaking. Now we are back at Galadriel, still swimming. It's a bit foggy out, but she hears some rumbling noise. Now she has her dagger back, but no sheath. It's literal magic, don't you know? Then we see a raft approaching. Seems a shipwreck with some survivors on it. Oh, look. Halbrand. Or Halbrand, depending on which part of the world you're from. The passengers are all bickering about whether or not they should let Galadriel on board. Galadriel had hid her ears because humans or something. Of course, all the men seem to be against her joining them, but a woman rescues her. We learn that there is a sea worm that attacked them 2 weeks back. The men don't want to tell Galadriel about their business, but the woman says, why not? Does she look dangerous to you? And Halbrand replies, looks can be deceiving. Rich coming from you, Halbrand. One of the men comes over and pulls up Galadriel's hair and reveals her ears. They all freak out about her being an elf. Like, seriously? 2/3 of all humans fought alongside the elves against Morgoth. But this show treats every single one as if they worship Morgoth through and through. Galadriel tells the man to unhand her, sir. And they all freak out at her. Then someone spots a sail and starts calling for help. But the fog hides most of the ship, so a man hushes them, saying that corsairs prowl these waters, and until they see the sails, they need to keep quiet. They don't want their skin peeled off. After a moment, they notice that it isn't just a ship. It's their ship. On the back of a sea worm. It ends up going beneath them, but the tail fin hits the raft. Barely. The woman who advocated for Galadriel up until she found out Galadriel was an elf then pushes Galadriel into the water. Everyone starts screaming, which is only going to draw the attention of the sea worm. Halbrand is trying to separate part of the raft from the rest as the sea worm comes back around and bites the raft, throwing some survivors into the sea before eating them. This is obviously not the greatest image because it's all moving really fast, but you have Galadriel here on the left half of the screen, and then you see this person on the right, kind of like upside down in the water. Well, below them is the lower half of the jaw of the sea serpent, and then there's the higher version, which you can't really see because it's probably peeking out of the water, and it just chomps him down and eats the guy. And it's the guy with the cap on his head from previously. So there's that. Um, so finally something happens. Galadriel had already started swimming away when this happened. All this attacking, of biting and whatnot. So she looks around for the worm, but sees some spikes in the air and is worried it's the worm. Turns out it's Halbrand's raft. Halbrand lets her up and asks her what she is called. She gives her name and introduces him. He introduces himself. He asks what their heading is. Good boy. Elrond and Prince Durin are still smashing rocks, but we find out from subtle movements that it's a ploy. Probably a political one. Elrond convinces Prince Durin to escort him to the exit. And on a lift, we learn that Prince Durin holds a grudge. It has been 20 years since Elrond has seen him. Elrond missed his wedding, the birth of two of his children. It's a big deal to Durin. 20 years is short for Elrond, but to Durin it's a lifetime, and he is ticked that Elrond missed it. I do find this slightly funny because dwarves can live for several hundred years, but obviously not thousands like an elf would. So this shot is clearly green screened in. Separately, it looks good, but in the same shot, it looks like they didn't spend enough time blurring them together. You can clearly see his hand behind him, not on him. Like it was the same screen, all the same camera angles and all that fun stuff. They just did two different shots at the same time. I'm presuming that at one point they had Elrond leaning over, putting his hand on like a green screen item, that later on they have Durin stand there. Or they had Durin shot there, and then they put a item right where he was at, and then that's how they touched him. But you can tell it's green screened in. So Elrond wishes him congratulations and hopes that Durin can forgive him. He also wishes to apologize to Durin's family. Durin ends up bringing him to his home to meet Disa, and tells him that he is saying sorry and goodbye. But Disa has other plans. Disa is tickled pink that Elrond is here. Durin must have talked about him. Disa says he is staying for dinner, and Durin says he's leaving. She repeats that he's staying for dinner, and he repeats that he's leaving. And then she repeats that he's staying for dinner. Apparently, we find out that Disa is a resonator. She sings to rocks, and the resonation tells her where silver, gold, and other mining deposits are at. And that is how Disa met Durin. I have to admit, Owen Arthur does a magnificent job as a dwarf. The humor surrounding him is so good. Like, it's on point. And it's a bright spot in the series. Excellent casting. There's a dinner dispute that gets heated between Elrond and Durin. But Disa calms it down, and Elrond tries to leave, but it seems to be a ploy on Elrond's part, and to his credit, it works. Back with Galadriel and Halbrand, we get this shot of Halbrand's necklace. Halbrand tries to figure out Galadriel, and in turn she tries to figure him out. He tells of his home being burned by the orcs, and she asks where he is from. He doesn't want to say, and they get into an argument. Eventually, he lets slip that he is from the Southlands. She wants him to take her there, but he has other plans. Then a storm breaks out far away, but moving towards them. Bronwyn runs to her village to tell them about the neighbors. They don't want to listen and give her the elf lover stare. During this time, Theo is at home and hears some scratching in the floor, so he starts smacking the floorboards out of anger. Having torn a hole in the board, he looks in and gets this gem. Nothing like seeing an eyeball in your floor. Might find it hard to sleep with that in your floor. But now we're going to pan over to Arondir, still crawling through the tunnel. He notices some scratchings and hears some gutturals. He begins to see claws of what could be orcs or perhaps a new golem-like creature, but there is more than one, so it could be goblins. He flees down a tunnel he hasn't been down yet and gets stuck, but manages to get through and falls face first into a pool. He gets out of the pool and pulls out his knife. He waits for something to come out of the water. Bubbles start coming up and seem to move closer to him, but he doesn't notice the clawed hands that grab him from behind, because orcs just hang out in random dark places waiting for years for someone to show up. Right. See if you can notice the claws in this shot. It's supposed to be, I guess, their attempt at like a horror part of the story. So Bronwyn races home and finds out it's been sacked. She then notices the giant hole in the floorboards. Theo pops out of a hole in the corner with a small door. Theo tells her to go and get help, but she hides in the closet instead, because why be reasonable? Looks like an orc burrower. It shuffles around for a bit, but it gets close to each of their areas. Bronwyn gets startled and hits the back of the dresser closet, and a potion begins to slide that she catches at the same time the orc breaks in the closet. Theo stabs the orc in the back with what looks to be shears, and through teleportation. But the orc slashes Theo's arm and he falls down. Orcs are apparently ridiculously strong, though, as he throws a table in front of Theo with no effort. Then Bronwyn throws the potion at his face, and it explodes in red. The orc rips off the bone mask, and we get this lovely sight. There's the shears sitting in his back. They're pretty long shears, too. Theo heads up some stairs, and the orc pursues, ignoring Bronwyn's little potato peeler knife. The orc breaks some stairs trying to get Theo. Bronwyn yells and charges at the orc with a metal blade of some sort. The blade goes into the orc's back, and he spins, knocking Bronwyn away, and when he spins, the handle of the blade gets stuck in the stairwell. He can't advance towards Bronwyn. Then Theo drops a rope from above down on the orc's neck, and jumps off the upstairs with the other end of the rope to hang the orc. But the orc breaks. The rope breaks, and the orc approaches Theo, but Bronwyn chops off his head. Bronwyn announces that anyone who wants to live, they head for the Elven Towers at dawn. Kind of convincing people when you show up with an orc head. The storm is raging, and both Halbrand and Galadriel are holding on for dear life. The waves are huge, and it looks bleak. Galadriel ties herself to a pole and reaches out to Halbrand. But lightning strikes and conveniently hits the pole she was attached to, so she falls into the sea. Halbrand notices that the rope is still connected to Galadriel and pulls her to safety. What? No, that's not what he did? Oh, she's being anchored by a piece of wood. A pulley? About the size of a small stump? So he climbs all the way down on the rope to try and free her? He sees her dagger and cuts her loose? Who wrote this? Fire them immediately. Well, they both survive. Who could have seen that coming? Nori and Poppy go to see the stranger, who is star watching in a creepy way. He sees the firefly lanterns they are carrying and causes Poppy to burst with magic. All the fireflies get out and fly around. One lands on his hand and he starts mumbling to it. It flies away and he repeats the process with more fireflies. Riveting. Absolutely riveting. The fireflies begin forming in the air like stars in the sky, showing some form of a constellation. Apparently, the stranger wants help finding the stars. Nori says she has never seen those stars, but she knows where to find them. Oh, and then all the fireflies die. Except the ones in Nori's lantern. Because consistency. Durin and his father, the king, talk about something that Elrond doesn't know about. They are hiding something from the elves. While Durin trusts Elrond, his father doesn't. This chest holds a bright jewel. It better not be a Silmaril. Amazon will sink and burn if it is. So Theo is packing for the trip, now that it is morning. Why didn't he pack the night before? He pulls out the bundle holding the broken sword he clept from the barn earlier. He holds it in his hand, and there's a hissing sound, and blood comes from a wound near his wrist and is drawn towards the sword. When it touches the sword, the blade catches on fire and begins to reforge itself. I wish I was joking. That's not how any weapon works in all of Arda, regardless of the source. There's your proof. His mother calls for him, and you can see a long line of people on the ridge walking somewhere. Presumably the Elven Towers. The final shot is Galadriel and Halbrand passed out on their raft in the calm morning. A shadow passes over them back and forth. Galadriel wakes up, and we see this silhouette. Then she passes out again. Could it be these corsairs that the former survivors mentioned? Nah, probably the Númenóreans. My money personally is on like Isildur or maybe Elendil. Probably more likely to be Isildur. But we'll find out, I guess, the next episode. And that's the end of the episode. But I have a few things to mention about the former survivors and their location. So the Corsairs of Umbar and their kind are far to the south and east. Galadriel would have been north and west when sailing west from the Grey Havens, nowhere near each other. The survivors, former, seem to be from the Southlands like Halbrand. That is nowhere near where Galadriel would be. Númenor would be closer, but it is still south of the direction the elves would take to Valinor, if they were ever going there. But it never happened that way until the end of the Third Age. This series is still in the Second Age. I know you're all shocked by the story not being accurate at all to any of Tolkien's work, and the writing, if you can call it that, is atrocious. The sins of this flaming show are many. I just want something to bloody happen. They're just making it drawn out as much as possible with no payoff so far. Anyways, what do you think? Leave a comment on the direction you think it will go. Do you like or dislike the series so far? Could it get better? Is it more likely to get worse? We're interested to hear what you think. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, but most importantly, please share this video everywhere. Thank you for all your support. Walk in the light, my friends.